There is a new kind of machine in orbit right now that does something satellites were never supposed to do. It does not send you a picture, it sends you an answer. Picture a 300-kilogram box of silicon and solar panels, falling around the Earth at 7.5 kilometers per second. Below it, a river in a country it has never visited. The machine looks down, splits the reflected sunlight into hundreds of invisible color bands, runs a neural network on what it sees. Right there, in the vacuum of space, with no ground station in sight, and quietly decides that an algal bloom is forming, how severe it is, and exactly which coordinates to warn about. Then it transmits a message smaller than this paragraph. Not a terabyte of raw imagery, not a photograph for a human analyst to squint at for hours. A verdict, delivered by a satellite that thinks. This sounds like science fiction. It is operational hardware, launched from a floating platform in the Yellow Sea, built by a Chinese AI satellite company, already sold to foreign governments, and it is the opening move in a constellation of more than 200 intelligent satellites that China is putting into orbit. For 6 decades, the sky has been where we kept our cameras. What is happening right now, today, is the sky becoming the place where we keep our thoughts. If you want to understand how orbital computing actually works, and why the country that cracked it first owns the tempo of information for the next century, stick around and hit subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel bring you more stories like this one. Let's get into it. To understand why this is such a big deal, you need to understand the architecture that every satellite on Earth has lived under since the space age began. And to be fair, this architecture works. It works so well that we built our entire civilization's nervous system on top of it. Satellites watch everything. They track hurricanes before they make landfall. They measure soil moisture across entire continents. They spot oil spills, illegal fishing fleets, methane leaks, crop disease, military movements. Earth observation is one of the greatest tools humanity has ever built, and the hyperspectral version of it is even more powerful, because a hyperspectral imager does not just take a photograph, it splits light into hundreds of narrow spectral bands. An ordinary camera tells you a field is green. A hyperspectral imager tells you the crop is stressed, the water is contaminated, and the rock underneath is rich in lithium. Every pixel becomes a chemical fingerprint. But here is the catch. The satellite is dumb. Brilliant eyes, no brain. The traditional architecture works like this. The satellite passes over its target for a few minutes and captures an enormous amount of raw data. A single hyperspectral satellite can generate on the order of a terabyte of imagery per day. That is roughly the entire printed collection of a large university library. Every single day, per satellite. Then it stores that data on an onboard recorder, and then it waits. It waits until it flies over a ground station, a window that typically lasts only a handful of minutes per pass. During that tiny window, it opens the fire hose and tries to dump as much of that terabyte as the downlink can swallow. Then ground servers, hours later, finally run the analysis, and only then does a human analyst see a result. Think about what that means in real time. A flood begins in the morning. The satellite photographs it at noon. The data lands at a ground station in the afternoon. The processing finishes at night. The alert reaches the emergency ministry the next day. The camera saw everything. The information arrived too late to matter. And here is the darkest number in the whole story. By industry estimates, the overwhelming majority of what satellites capture, by some accounts up to 90%, is never analyzed at all. It is captured, downlinked at great expense, and archived into digital graveyards, because there is simply more data than ground teams can look at. The bottleneck was never the eyes. It was the pipeline between the eyes and the brain. So the old problem is not that satellites are bad. It is that the entire architecture separates seeing from thinking by thousands of kilometers and many hours. The eyes are in orbit, the brain is on the ground, and the pipe between them is thin, intermittent, and congested. This felt like a problem with no real solution, because the obvious fix, just put a computer on the satellite, ran straight into the most hostile environment humans have ever tried to run silicon in, until someone decided to stop treating that environment as a wall and started treating it as a design constraint. So here's the question everyone in the space industry has asked for decades. If the downlink is the bottleneck, why not just put a real computer on the satellite? Why spend 60 years mailing photographs to the ground when you could think upstairs? And the answer is, because space is brutal to computers. And the 3 reasons it is brutal are specific, physical, and brutal enough that they made orbital computing the industry's favorite joke. Reason 1. Radiation. Above the protective blanket of the atmosphere, cosmic rays and solar particles slam into silicon constantly. A single high-energy particle can flip a bit in a chip, turn a 1 into a 0. Engineers call this a single event upset. On the ground, your laptop is shielded by 100 kilometers of air. In orbit, your processor is standing in the rain with no umbrella. So the industry built radiation-hardened chips. But rad-hard chips are manufactured on old, conservative process nodes. They are generations behind. They cost millions of dollars, and they are slow. Putting a rad-hard CPU in orbit was like flying a museum piece. Reason 2. Power. A modern AI accelerator wants hundreds of watts. The biggest data center chips pull 700 watts each. A small satellite's solar arrays and batteries budget power in the range of a few hundred watts total for everything. The radio, the attitude control, the imager, the heater that keeps the battery alive in eclipse. There simply was no spare electricity to feed a real brain. Reason 3. Heat. This is the one nobody thinks about. In a vacuum, there is no air, which means no convection. A chip on Earth cools because air and heat sinks carry heat away. A chip in orbit can only shed heat by radiating it, slowly, through carefully designed surfaces. Run a powerful processor in space, and it will cook itself alive. The vacuum that protects the chip from weather also traps its heat like a sealed oven. So the industry settled into a division of labor that looked permanent. Dumb satellites in the sky, smart servers on the ground. Orbital computing became the dismissive nickname of the aerospace world, the equivalent of a science fair project. Every few years, some university would fly a tiny demo, run a small model on one satellite, publish a paper, and nothing would change. No cross-links between satellites, no paying customers, no constellation. A cute demo. That was the ceiling. And notice the trap this created. The West had the best chips, but no urgent reason to re-architect the whole system. Its ground infrastructure was rich, its cloud was deep, its analysts were many. China had the opposite position. A desperate strategic need for fast, autonomous Earth observation, a booming commercial space sector, and a national policy pushing AI into everything. But it faced the same physics. Radiation does not care about your 5-year plan. Vacuum does not negotiate. The assumption everywhere was the same. Orbital intelligence will remain a demo, because the environment forbids real compute. You cannot put a brain in orbit. That assumption held for decades. And then the reframe arrived. And it did not come from building a better chip. It came from asking a different question. Here is the twist. And this is the part that changes everything. China's engineers did not try to build a supercomputer in orbit. They did not wait for a perfect radiation-hardened AI chip that does not exist. They reframed the problem entirely. The question stopped being how do we put a data center in space, and became how much thinking does a satellite actually need to do before the downlink problem disappears? And the answer is surprisingly little. The satellite does not need to train models. It does not need to run a giant foundation model. It needs to run detection, filtering, classification, a narrow, well-trained inference task on fresh data. That is edge AI, the same philosophy as a smart camera that detects a person instead of streaming video all day. Now apply that to orbit and walk through the mechanism step by physical step. Step 1. Capture. The hyperspectral imager looks down and splits the reflected sunlight into hundreds of narrow spectral bands. Not red, green, blue. Hundreds. Every single pixel of the image arrives with its own spectrum attached. A chemical signature. Water with algae reflects differently from clean water. Stressed wheat reflects differently from healthy wheat. Lithium-bearing rock reflects differently from ordinary granite. The satellite is not photographing the world. It is reading its chemistry. Step 2. Think. The fresh data flows directly into an onboard AI accelerator, an edge neural network processor. Now, here is where the radiation problem gets handled. And the handling is the clever part. Instead of using one perfect rad-hard chip, Chinese designers lean on commercial-grade compute hardened by architecture. The classic trick is triple modular redundancy. 3 processors run the same inference simultaneously, and a voter circuit compares the outputs. If a cosmic ray flips a bit in one chip, the other 2 outvoted. Combine that with error-correcting memory, watchdog resets, and software-level fault tolerance, and a fragile commercial chip becomes a reliable orbital brain for narrow tasks. The radiation problem does not get solved. It gets outvoted. Step 3. shrink. This is the payoff. The neural network processes the hyperspectral cube in orbit and produces a verdict. Event detected. Class, coordinates, confidence score. The data that must cross the downlink collapses from terabytes to kilobytes. Think about that ratio. A terabyte is 1 trillion bytes. A text alert is a few hundred. The fire hose becomes a whisper. The satellite no longer needs a long ground station window to dump raw imagery. It can transmit its answers in seconds, over a small radio, to a small antenna, almost anywhere. The bottleneck was never fixed. It was made irrelevant. Step 4. Swarm. One thinking satellite is useful, but China did not stop at one. The newest experimental payloads, launched from the Dongfeng Commercial Space Innovation Test Zone, are designed to do most of their filtering, recognition, and inference on orbit, and to talk to each other, using laser inter-satellite links, beams of light carrying data between satellites at gigabit rates. The machines form a compute cluster in orbit. Workloads can be handed from one satellite to the next, the way servers in a data center pass tasks around. China ranks among the first countries to put a satellite-to-satellite compute cluster into orbit, and to demonstrate that orbital compute can be more than a single satellite demo. And here is the brilliant part. Remember the 3 killers of orbital computing: radiation, power, heat? None of them get fixed. They disappear as blockers because the architecture changed. Radiation is neutralized by voting redundancy instead of perfect chips. Power is manageable because inference bursts are short and cheap compared to training. Heat is manageable because the brain runs in duty cycles. Think for a minute, cool for 10, instead of running like a data center. The old weaknesses were properties of the wrong architecture. Change the architecture, and the walls become design details. That is not a metaphor. That is just systems engineering. One genius brain in orbit was impossible. A swarm of competent, networked, good enough brains was apparently only a reframe away. But demos are one thing. Deployment is another. And this is where the story stops being a lab curiosity and becomes an industrial program. The hardware is flying. 2 hyperspectral AI satellites, 300-kilogram twins, lifted off aboard a smart Dragon 3 rocket launched from a sea platform off Haiyang, on China's Shandong coast. Sea launches matter more than they look. A floating launch site in the Yellow Sea means flexible orbital targeting, fast turnaround, and a cadence of launches that a landlocked cosmodrome cannot match. You cannot build a 200-satellite constellation with boutique launch scheduling. You need a production line. Sea launch infrastructure is part of that production line. The satellites were developed by Star Vision, a Chinese AI satellite company, and they combine hyperspectral imaging with onboard edge AI, exactly as described. Filtering, recognition, and inference performed in orbit. Their specifications are concrete and public. 5-meter spatial resolution, a 300-kilometer wide imaging swath, and the ability to revisit the same location every 5 days. Their mission profile is civilian and commercial, monitoring water quality, vegetation, crops, and mineral resources. And here is the geopolitical detail that should get your attention. These 2 spacecraft are not for China. They were built for Indonesia and Uzbekistan. Read that again. A Chinese commercial company is exporting thinking satellites to foreign governments. The customer does not need to build ground stations, hire analyst armies, or buy GPU clusters. It buys alerts, answers as a service, delivered from orbit. That is a business model, a diplomatic instrument, and a foothold in the information infrastructure of the Global South, all in one contract. And the 2 twins are only the vanguard. They belong to the Oriental Smart Eye Constellation project, which aims to deploy more than 200 high-resolution intelligence satellites. 200 thinking machines, coordinated, cross-linked, revisiting the planet on a drumbeat. Meanwhile, the experimental birds from the Dongfeng test zone are pushing the cluster architecture further, proving that orbital compute scales horizontally, satellite to satellite, instead of vertically, chip by chip. On the ground, the backbone is being built too. Beijing has opened its first space computing center, tying orbital data into the national cloud and AI infrastructure. Because the architecture is not satellites instead of the ground. It is a hierarchy: fast, narrow thinking in orbit, deep, heavy thinking on the ground, and a thin, fast pipe of verdicts between them. Now zoom out to the policy layer. Commercial space is a designated strategic growth sector in China's industrial planning. Launch cadence, satellite mass production, commercial remote sensing licensing, AI integration, all of it is being pushed by state strategy and state-guided capital. The logic is the same logic you see in Chinese solar, batteries, and shipbuilding. Prove the architecture, then industrialize it, then flood the market with volume until cost curves bend. A thinking satellite that costs what a dumb satellite used to cost is not an increment. It is a different market, and the market is responding because every customer on Earth, ministries of agriculture, disaster agencies, mining companies, insurers, faces the same old problem. Too much raw data, too little time. China is offering them the exit. Do not buy imagery, buy answers. This is happening right now, today, not on a roadmap slide, in orbit, transmitting. But here is the honest part of this story. And I want to be straight with you, because this format does not do blind hype. 5-meter resolution is genuinely useful for agriculture, water, and minerals. But it is not the sharpest eye in orbit. Western commercial optical satellites resolve objects around 30 centimeters. 5 meters sees a field, not a face, a ship, not its name. The value here is the hyperspectral chemistry plus the onboard brain, not raw sharpness. For pure imagery, the gap with the best Western birds is real. Second, the onboard brain is an edge brain. It detects, filters, classifies. It does not train. It does not run giant foundation models. Heavy reasoning still happens on the ground, in the space computing centers and cloud clusters. Orbital inference is a triage layer, not a replacement for the ground brain. The architecture is a hierarchy, and anyone selling it as fully autonomous AI in space is selling fiction. Third, a 5-day revisit is a rhythm, not a live feed. For a constellation to watch the planet continuously, you need density, which is exactly why the 200 satellite plan exists. But 200 is a roadmap number. Constellations eat capital, eat launch slots, eat years. The Oriental Smart Eye is a promise in the process of being kept, not a finished nervous system. And fourth, the redundancy that makes commercial chips survivable in orbit costs mass, power, and money. Triple modular redundancy means you fly 3 brains to get one reliable one. Every watt spent voting is a watt not spent imaging. The engineering is clever precisely because the constraint is real. None of this erases what has already been proven. It simply marks the distance between a working vanguard and a finished system. The architecture works. The exports are signed. The cluster has been demonstrated. The rest is cadence, capital, and time. And those are exactly the variables China's industrial model is most comfortable with, which brings us back to the bigger picture this whole story has been building toward. Because this is not really about satellites. It is about where thinking happens. For the entire history of the space age, orbit has been a place for eyes. Cameras, telescopes, sensors, all of them feeding data down to brains on the ground. The country that owned the ground stations and the server farms owned the insight. The sky was a mirror reflecting data downward, and all the power sat at the bottom of the pipe. That geometry is inverting. The moment a satellite can look, understand, and alert, on its own, in orbit, in seconds, the value migrates upward. The sky stops being a mirror and starts being a mind. And the side that builds that mind first does not just sell satellites, it sells the tempo of information itself. Floods answered in minutes, crop disease flagged the same hour. Mineral maps delivered to a ministry that owns no supercomputer. That is not a product, that is dependency, packaged as a service. And notice who is buying first. Not the West, Indonesia, Uzbekistan, the Global South, countries that will never afford a full ground segment intelligence stack, and that can now leapfrog straight to orbital answers from a Chinese provider. A parallel information architecture is being assembled above our heads, customer by customer, launch by launch. 2 skies, 2 brains, 2 stacks that do not need each other. The world that treated orbit as a camera mount didn't announce its own ending. It just started losing altitude to something that thinks. So here's the question I want to leave you with, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. When satellites from rival civilizations are making judgments about the Earth on their own, autonomously, in orbit, in real time, who do you think gets to audit what the sky knows? The country that built the brain? The country being observed? Or nobody at all? Because by the time anyone asks, the thinking is already done, and the answer is already sold? Drop your answer below. I read every single one. And if you want a front row seat for the next time an impossible machine quietly goes operational, hit subscribe. The next decade of this story, orbital data centers, thinking constellations, the industrialization of the sky is going to move faster than anyone expects. You will want to be here for it. I'll see you in the next one.